The next escalation didn't come as paint or paper, it came dressed in legality. A week after the banner went up, I received a certified letter from a law office in town. The envelope was heavy, deliberate, and smelled faintly like expensive perfume. Karen's touch, I was sure of it. The letter inside was titled, "Cease and Desist Regarding Public Defamation and Harassment." According to her attorney, who, as I'd later learn, was her cousin, my signage and false accusations had caused emotional distress and reputational damage to a respected community member. The best part? She demanded I take down the banner, repaint my fence to the neighborhood-approved tone, and issue a written apology posted to the HOA newsletter. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. She'd gone full courtroom drama, but her foundation was made of wet cardboard. I didn't panic. I'd been expecting her to try the legal angle eventually, because control freaks always think the law will bend to their feelings. I took the letter straight to my lawyer, a retired prosecutor named Frank who lived 3 blocks over and happened to despise the HOA as much as I did. He read it, chuckled, and said, "Tell Karen's cousin to bring snacks, because if they want a fight, I bill by the hour." We drafted a perfectly polite response. A notice of counterclaim potential, outlining documented harassment, trespassing, vandalism, and defamation, with photo and video evidence attached. Frank sealed it and sent it back that same day. 2 days later, Karen cornered me in my driveway again, clutching her phone like a Bible. "You're making this worse for both of us," she snapped. Her tone had changed. It wasn't gloating anymore, it was brittle, almost desperate. "Just take it down. The banner, the yellow, everything. People are talking." I sipped my coffee and said, "That's funny. People were already talking when you repainted my fence." Her jaw tightened. "You don't get it. This neighborhood used to have standards." I shrugged. "And now it has consequences." Her eyes flashed with something that wasn't just anger anymore, it was embarrassment mixed with fear. That's when I knew the lawsuit threat had backfired. Bill must have spoken to her, because at the next HOA meeting, she wasn't sitting up front. She was in the back row, silent, avoiding eye contact. The board formally rescinded her suspension and replaced it with a probationary period. One more violation and she'd lose her position entirely. When the motion passed, the room clapped. Karen didn't. For a while, things went quiet again. Too quiet. The kind of silence that hums with tension. Then the trucks came. One morning, I woke to the sound of grinding metal and diesel engines. 2 flatbeds were parked in front of Karen's house, loaded with fencing panels and concrete posts. She was outside directing workers in a visor and clipboard like she was running a military operation. I watched from my porch as they started digging holes right along our property line. When I walked over to ask, she met me with that tight smile I'd come to recognize as her battle armor. "New fence," she said sweetly. "HOA-approved design. We're upgrading to uniform height and material." I glanced at the plans clipped to her folder. They extended 6 inches into my yard. "That's not your property line," I said. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "It's the surveyed line, according to our records." I had those records too, and they didn't match. She was trying to reclaim the fence by moving the boundary itself. It was bold, illegal, and exactly her style. "You might want to double-check that," I said evenly. She smiled wider. "Already did. Maybe your memory's off." I walked back to my garage and pulled out the original land plat from my closing document. The boundary was crystal clear. But instead of confronting her right away, I decided to let her keep digging. Literally. By afternoon, her workers had poured concrete for the first few posts, encroaching a solid foot onto my property. I documented everything. Drone photos, timestamps, GPS coordinates, the whole legal buffet. Then I called the county zoning office and asked for an emergency inspection. They arrived the next day, clipboards in hand, and Karen rushed out to greet them, all smiles and sugary charm. "We're just updating aesthetics," she chirped. The inspector's expression darkened as he measured the distance between posts and property markers. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "you've built beyond your boundary." Her face fell. "That's impossible. My survey says—" He cut her off. "Then your survey's wrong. You're going to need to remove this section or face a fine." She looked at me, and I gave her the same smile she'd given me months earlier when she'd painted my fence. "You're welcome," I said softly. That was the day the neighborhood officially turned against her. The workers left early, shaking their heads. Someone filmed the entire exchange and uploaded it to the local community Facebook page. The comments were brutal. "Karen strikes again," one read. "She's addicted to fences," another said. Overnight, she became the neighborhood punchline. But even humiliation couldn't stop her. A few days later, I noticed motion lights flickering near the fence line. She'd installed cameras pointing directly into my yard. Cheap ones, but obvious enough to feel invasive. When I confronted her, she insisted they were for property protection. I told her to angle them away or I'd file another complaint. She sneered. "Maybe I like watching." I stepped closer until our shadows touched. "Then I hope you enjoy the show," I said. That seemed to shake her. The next morning, she called animal control, claimed my dog was aggressive and unlicensed. The officer showed up, checked the records, and left laughing when he saw my old golden retriever snoring on the porch. Later that day, the mailman handed me another envelope, this one stuffed with anonymous complaints about unsightly yard decor and disruptive lighting. The handwriting was all the same. Karen had gone from power plays to petty harassment, grasping at whatever leverage she could still find. That's when I decided to end it, not with revenge, but with exposure. I gathered every piece of evidence I'd collected over the months. Photos, videos, letters, emails, recordings of her fake HOA meetings, even the clip of her repainting my fence from day one. I compiled it all into a digital folder titled, The Karen Chronicles. Then I sent it, not to the police, not to Bill, but to every single homeowner in the subdivision with a short note. Transparency is the best color for a neighborhood. The reaction was nuclear. By evening, my phone was flooded with messages from neighbors thanking me, laughing, or expressing disbelief. A small group even showed up at my driveway, beers in hand, calling it Karen Day. The HOA emergency meeting that followed was the most attended in its history. Karen tried to defend herself, but every attempt only made things worse. "That video is out of context," she shouted. "I was improving his property." The room erupted in laughter. Bill finally stood, slamming his binder shut. "Enough," he said. "Karen, you're removed from the HOA board effective immediately. Permanently." The applause that followed was thunderous. I decided to up the ante once and for all. I printed a massive vinyl banner and hung it across my yellow fence, facing the street. In clean black letters it read, "Private property, do not modify without consent. Violators will be reported." Below that, I added a smaller line. "This includes artistic contributions by neighbors." It was passive-aggressive perfection. The banner caused a stir immediately. Neighbors stopped to laugh or take photos, while Karen stood frozen on her lawn, fists clenched. Later that afternoon, she tried to claim it violated signage codes, but Bill told her flatly, "It's legal." And deserved. That was the first time I saw him actually smile. For once, the tide was turning fully. That night, as I locked up, I noticed something through the blinds. Karen, sitting alone on her porch, staring at her white Lexus, shoulders slumped. She looked less like a tyrant and more like someone who'd finally realized she'd lost. But I knew that look. It wasn't surrender. It was plotting. And whatever came next, it wouldn't be small. Because Karen didn't know how to lose quietly. She only knew how to escalate. And I was ready for her next move. When the morning sun hit the white streak on my car, I saw it for what it really was, a declaration of war dressed in latex paint. It wasn't about fences anymore. It was about control, humiliation, and pride. Karen couldn't stand that she'd been called out in front of the neighborhood, so she'd decided to double down in the most passive-aggressive way possible. I didn't even bother cleaning it. I left the paint there, half because I wanted her to see it every day as a reminder that I knew, and half because it gave me an idea. If she wanted to play painter, then I'd give her the canvas of her dreams. But first I needed patience, the kind that made revenge feel like art instead of chaos. I started by installing a few extra security cameras, ones she wouldn't notice. I'd already caught her once, but this time I wanted angles, proof, and sound. I placed one behind a flower pot near the fence, another hidden in the eaves of my garage, and one trained directly on the driveway. Then I waited. Days passed, and Karen acted like nothing happened. She waved cheerfully every morning, wearing that fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. But her body language was different, tense, watchful. She was waiting for my reaction. I gave her none. That silence ate at her more than yelling ever could. The HOA fallout from her emergency meeting didn't go well either. Word had spread that she'd repainted my fence without permission, and now people were openly mocking her aesthetic vision. Someone even posted on the neighborhood Facebook page, "When's Karen's next art installation?" accompanied by a photo of my yellow fence. Every time she walked her dog, she'd pass by groups of neighbors whispering. That was my first win. But she was the type who'd rather burn down the neighborhood than lose face. A week later, I came home to find a fresh HOA notice taped to my door. Violation, non-conforming fence color. Remedy required within 14 days or fine of $250. I laughed out loud. Karen had managed to push a new bylaw through the board, one that retroactively banned bright colors. I called Bill again, who sighed so heavily I thought he might collapse through the phone. "I told her not to file that yet," he muttered. "She ambushed me in the parking lot yesterday with a stack of printed petitions. Half of them aren't even valid signatures." "Doesn't matter," I said. "I'll handle it." I knew what that meant. Karen had crossed from petty meddler to vindictive bureaucrat, using the HOA as her weapon. But I had something better, her own ego. The next day, I printed out stills from my security footage, the ones where she was repainting my car, and slipped them into a manila envelope addressed to HOA Legal. I dropped it off at Bill's house personally. "Just documentation," I told him. "Keep it safe." His eyebrows rose when he saw the thumbnail. "Oh, good grief," he muttered. "She's done for." With that step set in motion, I turned my attention to something more expressive. Karen loved white paint. She practically worshipped it. Her house was white, her trim was white, her mailbox was white. It looked like a snowdrift that had swallowed her personality. So one quiet night, I borrowed the same paint roller she'd used. She'd left it in her trash bin, still crusted with dried latex, and took a stroll to her driveway. Her pride and joy was a pearl-white Lexus parked under a motion light. I didn't touch it then. I just looked at it, memorizing the lines, the shimmer, the perfection. That car was her temple. And that was when it hit me. If she wanted everything to match, I'd make sure her car matched the fence perfectly. But I wasn't reckless. I didn't want to be caught doing what she'd done to me. So I set the trap differently. The next day, I hired a professional detailer, someone who specialized in wrap jobs. I told him I wanted a temporary weather-resistant matte wrap, and I showed him pictures of the fence. The guy raised his eyebrows but shrugged. "I can match that shade of white exactly," he said. "You sure about this?" "Oh, absolutely," I said, grinning. And I want it done early morning while the car's parked in the open. The owner gave permission. He didn't need to know the whole truth. I just left a fake HOA property beautification approval form taped to her mailbox that morning, complete with a bogus signature that looked suspiciously like Bill's. At 7:30 a.m., while Karen was inside hosting her daily gossip call, the wrap truck arrived. By the time she stepped outside an hour later, her car gleamed in the same blinding white as my fence, right down to the mismatched glossy patches. The detailer handed me the invoice with a polite nod and drove off before she even processed what had happened. I was sipping coffee on my porch when her scream echoed across the street. It was glorious. She stormed over, hair frizzed, robe half open, waving her phone like a weapon. "What did you do to my car?" she shrieked. "Nothing," I said calmly. "It looks great, doesn't it? Matches the neighborhood perfectly. Didn't the HOA approve uniform light tones?" Her jaw worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed, "That's my personal property." I tilted my head. "Oh, so property boundaries matter now?" That shut her up for exactly 3 seconds before she threatened to call the police. I shrugged. "Go ahead. I have video proof of you painting my fence and vandalizing my car. Should we compare notes?" Her eyes flickered with panic. She didn't call the police, of course. She couldn't afford to. Instead, she tried a different route, pity. That afternoon, she knocked on my door, pretending to be calm. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot," she began, forcing a laugh. "These little misunderstandings happen all the time between neighbors." I leaned against the doorframe, studying her carefully. "You mean when someone breaks into someone else's property and covers it in paint?" She ignored the jab. "I'll pay for your car detailing, okay? We can just forget all this." Her voice trembled slightly, not from guilt but from fear. Fear of losing her status as the perfect neighborhood ambassador. I could have ended it there. I really could have. But something in her tone told me she wasn't apologizing because she was sorry. She was doing it because she'd been cornered. And the thing about people like Karen is, if you give them an inch, they come back with a ruler. So I smiled politely and said, "Sure. Forget it." She relaxed visibly, her shoulders dropping. "Good," she said. "Glad we're on the same page." That weekend, I organized a neighborhood cleanup day, printed flyers, and went door to door inviting everyone. "We'll repaint the community entrance sign, refresh the planters, maybe even spruce up a few fences," I told them. Everyone loved the idea, except Karen, who looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. On the day of the event, she tried to reclaim control by bringing snacks and giving orders, but nobody listened. We painted the entrance sign neon yellow, just like my fence. I told everyone it symbolized community brightness. The irony was lost on no one except her. Took her about 3 quiet weeks to strike again, and those 3 weeks were suspiciously calm, the kind of eerie calm that makes you wonder if the other shoe has already dropped and you just haven't heard it hit the floor yet. Every time I stepped outside, Karen would glance at me through her window blinds, pretending to dust the sill or fix the curtains. The yellow fence and her white-wrapped Lexus stood like opposing chess pieces between our houses, glaring symbols of an unfinished game. Then one Tuesday morning, I found an envelope taped to my door with the HOA letterhead printed in uneven ink. Inside was a formal notice accusing me of excessive use of non-compliant materials on my fence and threatening immediate remediation or legal recourse. It was signed by acting interim HOA chairwoman, Karen Miller. I almost laughed. She'd gone behind Bill's back and forged a leadership title while she was still suspended. It wasn't even subtle. The woman was allergic to boundaries. I called Bill, of course. He sounded exhausted before I even finished my first sentence. "She did what?" he groaned. "I told her she couldn't send any official communication while suspended. That's grounds for removal." He paused, then sighed. "Don't worry, I'll handle it." But I'd learned that handling it in HOA terms meant burying it in meetings until everyone forgets. That wouldn't do. Karen's fake letter wasn't just about the fence anymore, it was a warning shot. She was testing how far she could go before someone stopped her. So I decided to test her right back, but on my terms. That evening, I set up my workshop in the garage. If she wanted to play bureaucrat, I'd give her paperwork she'd regret. I printed out my own Notice of Shared Maintenance Responsibility on crisp stationery that looked exactly like the HOA's letterhead, same font, same spacing. But instead of accusing her, I thanked her. As per HOA Regulation 8.1 regarding consistent property boundaries, thank you for repainting your side of the shared fence to maintain neighborhood standards. Please note that the matching color scheme extends to adjacent property accessories for visual uniformity. I slid that into her mailbox after dark, along with a glossy color sample labeled Karen White, Fence Edition. The next morning, I heard her yell from her porch, "Are you insane? I am not repainting my mailbox." She was holding the paper like it was radioactive. I came out holding my coffee, pretending to be confused. "What's wrong?" I asked. "You got your own rule enforced. I thought you'd appreciate it." She stomped over, waving the notice in my face. "This is not official," she snapped. I tilted my head and said calmly, "Then why did you use the same letterhead on yours?" Her jaw locked. She realized I'd just mirrored her move perfectly, and the neighbors watching from their lawns were catching on. By afternoon, word had spread that Karen had tried to ban my fence color again, and people were openly mocking her in the HOA group chat. Someone changed the group photo to a picture of a yellow crayon. It should have been funny, but I knew humiliation was gasoline for her temper. That evening, I caught her pacing her driveway on the camera feed, muttering to herself while Biscuit trotted in circles. Then she looked at my car, still wrapped in that identical white, and I could almost see the gears turning in her mind. Sure enough, the next day, my car wrap was gone. Cleanly peeled off, no residue, just the faintest scratch line near the bumper. She'd waited until after midnight, probably wearing gloves, and done it silently. I checked the footage. There she was, flashlight in one hand, her expression focused and furious. She wasn't vandalizing this time. She was reclaiming something she thought was hers. It was the first time her face looked almost desperate instead of smug. That was interesting. Rather than retaliate right away, I decided to pull the string tighter. I went to the police, not to file a report but to ask a question. If someone trespasses to alter my property after a documented incident, I asked the officer, does that count as harassment or just vandalism? He leaned back in his chair. If you've got proof and prior conflict records, that's harassment. Especially if there's HOA involvement. Perfect. I didn't want to get her arrested, not yet. I just wanted a record. So I filed an informational report. No charges, just documentation. Then I made sure to, accidentally, mention it to Lisa, the same neighbor who'd called Karen out before. By evening, everyone on the street knew that police paperwork existed. I didn't have to say a word. That rumor spread faster than fertilizer in spring. Karen became noticeably quieter, but she wasn't done. A few nights later, my security cameras caught her standing in front of my driveway at 11 p.m., staring at the house. No spray paint, no tools, just staring. It was creepy, the kind of thing you only see in horror movies before the window breaks. I stepped outside, still half asleep, and called out, "Need something?" She jumped, then forced a fake laugh. "Just checking for unauthorized lighting fixtures," she said weakly. "Part of my community watch duties." I reminded her she didn't have any duties. She scurried off without another word. That was when I realized this wasn't about the fence anymore. It was about me. I'd become the symbol of everything she couldn't control. The only thing worse to a control freak than losing power is losing face, and she'd done both. So she shifted tactics again. 2 days later, the HOA meeting notice appeared in everyone's mailbox. This time legitimate, signed by Bill. The agenda: discussion of property disputes and proposed code amendments. I knew immediately what that meant. At the meeting, she sat in the front row, arms crossed, wearing a pearl necklace that looked stranglingly tight. Bill opened the floor. "We're here to address recent conflicts and review color code standards," he said, clearly tired. Karen stood before anyone else could speak. "This chaos began when certain homeowners disregarded neighborhood harmony," she declared, glaring at me like I'd keyed her soul. "We can't have rogue colors and boundary violations. It lowers property values." I raised my hand calmly. Is it lowering them more than vandalism and trespassing? A murmur rippled through the room. Bill tried to mediate, but Karen wasn't listening. You people don't understand how property presentation affects our reputation, she barked. Our homes define us. That last sentence hung in the air, and I could tell even she heard how ridiculous it sounded. I said quietly, then maybe define yourself by decency instead of paint. That earned a few chuckles. She turned scarlet. After the meeting, she stormed up to me in the parking lot. You think you're clever, don't you? She hissed. You humiliated me. I stared at her and said evenly, you did that yourself. Then I turned and walked away, knowing that line would fester. The next morning, I woke up to chaos. Someone had spray-painted "Fence Freak" across my mailbox in dripping red letters. My cameras caught the act. It wasn't Karen this time. It was a teenage boy from 2 houses down, a kid named Max whose mother happened to be Karen's closest gossip partner. When I confronted her, she stammered, claiming the kids were just playing. That's when I realized she'd enlisted allies. The neighborhood wasn't just a battleground anymore, it was a chessboard and she was moving pawns. That night, I got an email from Bill. The HOA had formally reprimanded Karen for unauthorized property alterations and misuse of authority. She was temporarily suspended from any HOA-related activity for 3 months. I almost felt bad. Almost. The following morning, her car sat in the driveway, gleaming that perfect white. She hadn't removed the wrap because doing so would cost her. Every time she looked at it, she'd be reminded of her mistake. She started parking it in the garage, probably thinking that would shield her from judgment. But it didn't. Everyone knew. Even Biscuit seemed to sense her defeat. The little dog refused to walk near my fence anymore. For the first time in weeks, the neighborhood felt peaceful. No passive-aggressive notes, no shouted complaints about aesthetics. I mowed my lawn, whistled, and let the quiet settle in. But deep down, I knew Karen wasn't done. People like her never quit, they reload. And as much as I wanted to believe this was over, the twitch in her eye whenever she passed my house told me she was already planning her next move. She'd lost the first 2 battles, but she wasn't the kind to retreat gracefully. And when she came back, she wouldn't use paint or bylaws. She'd go bigger, bolder, and meaner. That was fine by me. I was ready. After all, I'd already proven I could play her game better than she ever could. The morning after the tire tracks appeared, I knew Karen's last play was coming, because people like her never fade quietly. They detonate in slow motion. The day began with odd little signs. My trash bins, always neatly lined up by the curb, were tipped over and left in the middle of the road. The sprinklers in my front yard had mysteriously been switched on overnight, flooding part of the lawn. Then there were the footprints, 2 sets, 1 human, 1 canine, leading from her driveway to my garage door. It was almost cartoonishly obvious, as if she wanted me to see. I checked my cameras, and sure enough, there she was at 1:37 a.m., wearing a hoodie, dragging Biscuit along on a leash like an accomplice, smirking into the darkness as she kicked my bin over and twisted the sprinkler dial. It was petty, childish, and somehow still chilling. That kind of calm, deliberate spite said she wasn't just angry, she was unraveling. I saved the footage again, but this time I didn't call Bill or the police. No. I decided the next move had to be mine, and it had to end things completely. No more warnings, no more waiting for her to implode on her own schedule. I'd given her the dignity of silence before, but she'd used that silence as a weapon. This time, I was going to use her own obsession against her. That afternoon, I visited the city code enforcement office. I'd discovered something during all this chaos. Karen's house, pristine and perfect as it looked, wasn't actually compliant with several of the updated safety regulations. Her front porch rail was too low by 2 inches, her fence line lighting extended beyond permissible lumens, and her ornamental front walkway didn't meet the drainage slope code. Normally, nobody would notice or care. But when you file a complaint backed with photos, measurements, and annotated municipal standards, The city takes notice. I didn't even have to mention her name. The coordinates and address were enough. The inspector promised to schedule a visit. I walked out whistling. 2 days later, the city truck arrived. Karen, ever the performer, came rushing out in her gardening hat and white gloves, ready to assist the inspector. I watched from my porch as the man measured, scribbled notes, and politely explained the infractions. Her smile faltered piece by piece. When he handed her the bright orange correction notice sticker, her jaw dropped. She tried arguing, but he pointed to the regulation binder. I could practically hear her voice cracking from across the street. She peeled the sticker off immediately, but it didn't matter. It had already been logged in the city database. She now had 30 days to fix everything or face fines. For the next week, she was a whirlwind of chaos. Contractors came and went. Loud hammering at dawn. Arguments over cost. I heard her yelling into her phone one morning, "He's behind this." "I know he is." She wasn't wrong, but proving it was impossible. I stayed polite and invisible, waving cheerfully every time she looked my way. That subtle smile of mine seemed to drive her closer to the edge than anything else. By the second week, things escalated again, but this time it wasn't paint or letters. It was the gossip mill. Suddenly, wild stories began circulating in the neighborhood. Someone claimed I'd been fined by the HOA for running an illegal business from home. Another rumor said I'd been reported for property neglect and public nuisance. The best one was that I'd been caught dumping chemical waste from my paint job into the storm drains. Every rumor had one thing in common: Karen's voice echoing behind it. I heard her whispering near the mailboxes, saw her waving her phone to prove things that didn't exist. It was pathetic, but also infuriating. She was trying to destroy my reputation now that she couldn't touch my property. So I made one last call. To my friend Dave, a local journalist who ran a column called Neighborhood Chronicles for the town's online paper. He loved stories about petty HOA wars and suburban absurdity. I sent him everything: photos, videos, HOA emails, even Karen's fake letterhead document. He laughed for a full minute on the phone before saying, "This is gold. I'll anonymize it, but people are going to eat this up." A week later, the article went live. The HOA queen who painted herself into a corner. It didn't use names, but the details were unmistakable to anyone on our street. The white Lexus, the fence, the forged letters, the power struggle. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments. Some called it poetic justice, others couldn't believe it wasn't fiction. But the local angle meant everyone in our community knew exactly who the HOA queen was. The next morning, I saw her sitting on her porch again, the article open on her tablet, her face pale and tight. For the first time, she didn't yell, didn't glare, she just looked small. That afternoon, a for sale sign appeared on her lawn. The same pristine lawn where she'd once lectured everyone about property values. You'd think that would have been the end, but no. Karen wasn't done yet. Her final act came 2 nights later. Around midnight, I woke to the faint sound of scraping metal. I looked out and saw her, dressed in black, standing beside my fence. She had a paint can in her hand and was pouring something over the top slats. I grabbed my phone and started recording. When I stepped outside, she froze like a deer in headlights. "Karen," I said calmly, "what are you doing?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me with wild eyes and whispered, "You ruined my life." I glanced at the can. It wasn't paint. It was thinner. The acrid smell hit me as the liquid dripped down the fence. "That's toxic," I said quietly. "You could have hurt yourself." She dropped the can and ran, tripping over her own driveway curb before disappearing inside. I didn't chase her. I didn't need to. The camera had caught everything. I called the sheriff's non-emergency line and handed over the footage. They came the next morning. When the deputies arrived, the entire cul-de-sac watched from behind curtains. Karen came out in her robe, hair unkempt, demanding to know what this circus was about. The deputy showed her the video. She broke. "It was just cleaning fluid," she cried. I wasn't trying to, but her voice faltered under the weight of her own lies. "They didn't arrest her, but they filed a formal report. Bill from the HOA came out too, clutching his folder like a shield. He told her calmly, 'Karen, for everyone's peace, it's time you moved on.'" She looked at him, at me, then at the yellow fence, her nemesis, and for the first time in months, she didn't say a word. By evening, the movers had arrived. Neighbors peeked out as boxes were loaded into the back of a rental truck. Biscuit barked from the porch, confused. Karen stood by the mailbox one last time, glaring across at me. "You think you won," she said quietly. "But you lost too." I raised an eyebrow. "How so?" She hesitated, her voice breaking. "Because this neighborhood's rotten now. You made it that way." Then she got into the Lexus and drove off, tail lights vanishing down the curve of the street. When it was over, she left in silence, her face pale, her hands trembling. For the first time, she didn't look angry, she looked hollow. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Over the next week, her decorations disappeared one by one. The seasonal flags, the hanging baskets, even the welcome friends mat. She stopped coming outside except to collect the mail. The white Lexus stayed parked in the garage, and the blinds stayed closed. The neighborhood relaxed for the first time in months. My fence, still proudly yellow, became a running joke and a badge of peace. People started calling it the Freedom Fence. I thought that was the end of it. But then one night, as I was closing my garage, I heard the faint hum of an engine. I looked up to see Karen's Lexus rolling slowly down the street, headlights off, stopping briefly in front of my house before continuing around the corner. It was late, too late for a casual drive. The next morning, I found tire tracks on my lawn. Not deep, not destructive, just deliberate. A signature. She wasn't finished, not yet. I knew that look in her eyes at the meeting wasn't defeat. It was retreat. The kind of quiet that comes before one last, desperate play. And as much as I wanted peace, I could already feel that itch in my chest. The one that comes when you know the final move hasn't been played. A month after Karen's Lexus disappeared around the corner, the street finally felt like it could breathe again. The endless tension that had wrapped itself around the cul-de-sac lifted like fog after a storm. People started waving at each other again, conversations happened without whispered digs, and for the first time in forever, no one was photographing lawn heights or fence shades. But peace in neighborhoods like ours never stays quiet for long. It mutates, softens, reshapes itself into gossip, nostalgia, and eventually legend. And as strange as it sounds, Karen became ours. The story of the woman who repainted my fence while I was away turned into the story people told newcomers during block parties, each retelling a little more exaggerated than the last. Some said she'd painted my entire house. Others claimed I'd repainted her car neon yellow. But the truth, the real, small, human truth, was quieter, sadder, and infinitely more absurd. I didn't see her again, though sometimes at night I'd catch myself expecting to see her white Lexus creeping down the street, headlights off, surveying her lost empire. Her house sold surprisingly fast to a young couple, Mark and Jenna, who worked from home and seemed determined to scrub away the history attached to their new address. They painted the place a soft blue, ripped out the manicured hedges, and replaced them with wildflowers. I liked them immediately. On their first weekend there, they knocked on my door holding a pie and nervously asked, "Hey, we heard there used to be some drama here?" I smiled and said, "Depends what you call drama. Around here, a paintbrush was basically a weapon." They laughed, and just like that, the neighborhood started to heal. But healing comes with ghosts, and mine lived in the cracks of the yellow fence. I'd thought about repainting it for good, turning the color into something neutral, something that didn't scream defiance every time the sun hit it. Yet every time I picked up a brush, I'd stop. Because that fence wasn't just paint, it was the story of boundaries, of standing firm when someone decided your silence was permission. So I left it. Weather beaten, imperfect, loud. The Freedom Fence, as people jokingly called it, became a landmark. Real estate agents even used it as a reference point. Oh, the house is just 2 down from the yellow fence. Karen would have hated that. Then one afternoon in early spring, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name written in blocky handwriting that I recognized immediately. Inside was a single page. You were right about the boundaries. I just didn't know where mine ended. Or maybe I didn't have any left. I sold the Lexus. Biscuits with my sister. I hope your fence holds up. It suits you. K. I read it twice, not sure how to feel. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was the closest thing I was ever going to get. I folded it neatly and tucked it into the same folder where I'd kept all the photos, letters, and complaints, the record of our suburban Cold War. Then I put the folder away for good. Summer came, and the street bloomed again. Without Karen's constant policing, people got creative. Lisa hung string lights over her driveway. The Millers installed a tiny koi pond without filing 6 forms first. Bill, now officially retired from the HOA, hosted barbecues in his front yard instead of hiding behind bylaws. The neighborhood looked messier, more colorful, more human. I realized, watching kids chalk the sidewalks, that maybe that was the point. Karen had wanted control because she was terrified of disorder. I'd fought her because I wanted the right to choose mine. In a weird, roundabout way, she'd made the neighborhood freer by trying to cage it. One evening, months later, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned that honey gold color that makes everything look softer, I saw a moving truck again. For a second, my chest tightened, irrational fear that she might have returned. But this one wasn't for her house. It stopped at the corner, 3 lots down. A new family unloading boxes, laughing, kids chasing each other across lawns. I wandered over to help, and while we carried a sofa together, the father nodded toward my fence and asked, "So what's with the yellow?" I grinned. "Long story," I said. "You'll hear it eventually. Everyone here has their version." He laughed. "Neighborhood folklore, huh?" "Exactly," I said. "Just remember one thing, never touch someone else's fence." He smiled like it was a joke, but I meant it. That line between what's yours and what's not, that invisible border we all pretend doesn't matter, turns out to be everything. Karen never understood that. To her, boundaries were challenges, not rules. To me, they were peace. And maybe that's the difference between us. She fought to own everything around her, while I just wanted to be left alone. Still, sometimes when the wind blows a certain way, I swear I can hear the faint rattle of paint cans or the squeak of her sprinkler system next door. The mind keeps echoes of its battles, even when the war is long done. And maybe part of me misses the tension, the sense of purpose that came from fighting someone who truly believed they were right. Karen was awful, but she made me sharper, more deliberate. In trying to control me, she forced me to define exactly who I was and what I stood for. Maybe that's the strangest kind of gift. A few weeks later, I finally decided to repaint the fence. Not to erase history, but to honor it. I went to the hardware store and picked out a new color called Storm Birch, a blend of yellow's warmth and gray's calm. When I started painting, a few neighbors came over to help, joking that it was the end of an era. We laughed, traded stories, and by sunset, the fence gleamed soft and steady, catching the last light like gold under cloud. It felt right. That night, as I sat on the porch, watching fireflies blink in the grass, I thought about Karen's letter again. Maybe she'd moved somewhere quieter, somewhere without fences, somewhere she didn't need to win to feel seen. Maybe she'd learned, or maybe she hadn't. I'd probably never know. But I did know one thing. If she ever showed up again, I wouldn't need cameras or traps or paperwork. I'd just point to that fence and say, "This time, let it be." A few months later, at the next community barbecue, Lisa raised a toast. To the fence that survived the HOA apocalypse. Everyone cheered, laughing. Even Bill grinned. The new couple brought lemonade, the kids ran through sprinklers, and for once, the only paint flying was in the form of chalk dust. It hit me then how absurdly fragile and funny life in our little cul-de-sac really was, how wars could start over wood planks and end with laughter under fairy lights. I stood there for a long while, the night air heavy with the smell of rain and paint thinner. She wasn't entirely wrong. The neighborhood had changed. The whispers, the pettiness, the little wars, it all lingered like smoke. But peace had a price, and I'd simply made sure the right person paid it. The next morning, I painted over the last white streaks she'd splattered on my fence, not with yellow this time, but with a soft, calm gray. The war was over, but the scars stayed, quiet reminders of what happens when pride turns a neighborly fence into a battlefield. For the first time in months, I sat on my porch, coffee in hand, listening to the sprinklers hiss gently in the distance. The street was still again. Peaceful. And somewhere out there, Karen was probably staring at another fence, planning her next crusade, unaware that she'd left behind the one neighborhood that finally learned how to stand up to her. When I pulled into my driveway after a week away visiting my brother, the first thing I noticed wasn't the quiet of the cul-de-sac or the faint smell of freshly cut grass, it was the blinding white glare of my fence. My dark cedar fence, the one I had spent 2 weekends staining to match the trim of my cabin-style house, now looked like a snowbank under a July sun. For a solid minute, I just stood there, squinting at it, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Then I saw the brush strokes, the uneven slaps of white paint bleeding onto the post caps, and the drips pooling in the grass. My stomach dropped, and I knew exactly who had done it before I even saw her. Karen was standing 2 doors down, watering her already drowned petunias with the smug posture of someone waiting for applause. She turned toward me with a bright, faux surprise smile, waving her gloved hand like I was a long-lost friend. "Oh, you're back early. You're welcome, by the way," she shouted across the street, loud enough for every other house to hear. I didn't respond. I walked to the fence, touched the tacky paint, and watched it smear across my fingers. "You're welcome," I repeated quietly, not sure whether to laugh or scream. Karen sauntered over, hips stiff with self-importance, clutching her watering can like a prop. "The HOA finally approved the color update," she announced. "We voted last month, uniform light tones for all perimeter fences. Yours was such an eyesore, you know, all dark and gloomy. I figured you wouldn't mind if I just got a head start." Her voice had that syrupy tone people use right before they stab you in the back. I blinked at her, trying to process the fact that someone had trespassed onto my property, defaced something I owned, and then claimed it was a favor. "You repainted my fence," I said evenly, without asking. She rolled her eyes. "Well, technically it's a shared boundary, and technically you weren't around to ask. And besides, white looks so much cleaner." The board agreed. There was no board meeting, of course. The HOA president, a man named Bill who spent most of his weekends at the golf course pretending to be busy, wouldn't have called one without notifying me. Karen just wanted control, and I had given her too much by ignoring her for so long. I took a deep breath, glanced at the sloppy paint job dripping into my lawn, and said, "Karen, this is vandalism." She let out a loud, incredulous laugh. "Oh, please. Don't be dramatic. You should be thanking me. I even used my own paint." I walked away before I said something I'd regret. But as I closed my front door behind me, I could hear her still talking to herself, projecting to the neighborhood. Some people just don't appreciate help. Inside, I made myself a coffee and stared out the window at the fence. Every slat of white mocked me, but underneath the irritation was something sharper, cleaner, a slow-burning calculation. Karen wanted control. She wanted attention. She wanted the neighborhood to see her as the self-appointed decorator of the street. Fine. If she wanted to play games, I could play too, but I wouldn't shout, complain, or threaten. I'd let her own arrogance do the heavy lifting. I started by calling Bill, the HOA president. Predictably, he hadn't approved any repainting rule. "Karen what?" he asked, sounding tired. "Oh, for crying out loud. She's been pestering me for months about that cohesive aesthetic nonsense. I told her we'd discuss it at the next quarterly meeting. You go ahead and file a complaint. I'll make sure it's on record. That was all I needed. Paperwork was my kind of revenge fuel. The next day, I took high-resolution photos of the fence, printed them, and submitted an official property damage report, complete with timestamps, HOA bylaws, and Karen's admission of guilt. But I didn't stop there. I visited the local paint store and bought 3 gallons of the most hideous neon yellow exterior paint I could find. The clerk raised an eyebrow when I asked for extra weatherproof gloss. I told him it was for an art project. Karen's routine was predictable: morning jog, mid-morning gossip call on her porch, and evening patrol with her little dog Biscuit. So that night, after dark, I moved fast. I repainted the entire inside of the fence, the side facing my property, with my bright yellow masterpiece. The color was so loud it practically hummed under the porch lights. By morning, my backyard looked like a lemon factory explosion. I waited for her reaction. I didn't have to wait long. Around 9 a.m., I heard the first shriek. "Oh my God!" she screamed. "What is that?" I stepped outside with my coffee, pretending to just notice. "Oh, you mean my side of the fence?" I said casually. "Yeah, I figured since you painted yours white without asking, I'd personalize my half too. Private property, after all." She was shaking with fury. "You can't do that. It's visible from my kitchen." I took a slow sip. "That sounds like a you problem." She called the HOA within the hour. Bill must have finally had enough of her because he told her flat out that she'd broken protocol first. But Karen wasn't one to back down gracefully. The next day, she plastered notices on everyone's mailbox about a neighborhood standards emergency meeting. I went, of course, just to see the show. She'd printed color photos of my yellow fence, and was pacing in front of the small crowd at the clubhouse like a prosecuting attorney. "This," she announced, "is what happens when we allow chaos. We need strict color codes, mandatory palettes, and compliance fines." Her voice trembled with self-righteousness. I could feel everyone else's patience thinning. One of my neighbors, Lisa, finally muttered, "Didn't you paint his fence first?" Karen froze, then tried to pivot. "Well, yes, but only because, then maybe stop painting things that aren't yours," Lisa said flatly. A few people snickered. Karen's face went scarlet. I thought that might be the end of it, but I underestimated how far she'd go to save face. The next morning, my car, the one parked in my driveway right beside the fence, had a long white streak running down the side, like someone had accidentally brushed against it with paint. The brush pattern was unmistakable. I didn't even need to check my security cameras, but I did anyway. There she was, 6:43 a.m., robe and gloves on, holding a dripping roller and humming to herself. She looked like a deranged artist. That was when I realized this wasn't about aesthetics anymore. It was a power war, and she was escalating. But she'd made her biggest mistake yet. She'd given me all the proof I needed, and this time, I wasn't going to settle for paperwork. No, this time, she was going to learn exactly what it felt like to have something precious improved without consent. I stood in my driveway, staring at the faint white line glinting in the sunlight, and smiled. The plan started forming right there between sips of cold coffee and the sound of Karen's sprinklers hissing next door. She thought she'd won because I hadn't shouted, hadn't called the police, hadn't made a scene. She had no idea that I was just getting started. When the party died down, I stayed outside a while, letting the quiet settle in. The moonlight cast soft silver over the fence, highlighting every brushstroke I'd made. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. And after everything, that was enough. Weeks later, I received another envelope, this one from the city clerk's office. Inside was a notice of record closure for the complaint history tied to my address. The official stamp read, "No outstanding violations. Case resolved." I smiled, thinking how poetic it was that bureaucracy had finally given me closure, the same system Karen had tried to wield like a sword. I walked down the driveway and stopped at the mailbox, running my hand along the wood. There was a faint mark still visible, where she'd spray painted that insult months ago. I never did sand it off completely. It stood there, faint but legible, a reminder that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's what you build after it ends.